In less than a second, the hull of the submarine was torn apart at a depth of about 3,500 meters. 5 passengers were crushed by the rapid pressure change so quickly they didn't even have time to realize it. And somewhere amidst the wreckage and mangled bodies, a broken Rubik's Cube floated. It belonged to 19-year-old Suleiman Dawood, who was striving to break the world record for solving the puzzle underwater while descending in a tourist submarine to the wreckage of the legendary Titanic. That's just one of the top 8 horrifying Guinness Records gone wrong stories, and it gets even scarier. As usual, viewer discretion is advised. However, not all records are that dangerous. For example, the world's largest globe, weighing 2.5 tons, didn't hurt anyone, although it spins thanks to 2 bulky electric motors. Unlike the globes from the sponsor of this video, Mova Globes. This first-of-its-kind technology allows the globe to rotate when exposed to light. That means no batteries or wires. On movaglobes.com, you'll find over 40 different designs, including world maps, famous works of art, and space objects with graphics provided by NASA. And with the promo code ECHOES, you'll get a 10% discount. So follow the link in the description. And while the world's largest globe turned out to be safe, I have some stories about much less innocent records. Let's dive in. In July 2013, Jesus Villa, nicknamed Half Animal, decided to set his 3rd world record. The first ones were about the 18 front flips on spring stilts and the longest front flip over a car on those same stilts. For 17 years, Jesus performed as an acrobat in the legendary Cirque du Soleil, so for his 3rd attempt, he threw himself a much more extreme challenge: to smash through 10 tempered glass panels in a jump, as you often see in movies. On July 12th, everything was set for the record attempt. Panels were in place, and the audience and Guinness representatives were present. So Jesus Villa revved up, pushed off the trampoline before the first glass, and flew into it with his hands folded in front of his head. The panel shattered, but the man fell on his back and couldn't get up. At first, laughter echoed throughout the audience until it turned out the stuntman had broken his neck. Luckily, he survived and even managed to return to his normal life. Unfortunately, not everyone is so lucky. In 1930, American pilot and stuntman Lowell Bales and his plane caused a sensation at national competitions. Next year, Bales became a legend of the golden age of air racing. He won almost all races in the US with record-breaking speed, but the pilot wanted to be the first in the world, not just on his home continent. So, when he failed to do so at the national competitions, Bales modified his plane to make it even more powerful. Then, the pilot once again attempted to break the world record for ground plane speed. On December 1st, he made 4 runs that day, yet failing to achieve his goal, he returned to the airfield again. On December 5th, Bales took off again, but when he reached a speed of 483 kilometers per hour, something unheard of happened. The plane spiraled uncontrollably around its axis, started to plummet, crashed into the ground, and exploded, leaving a long, fiery trail behind. Lowell Bales was found dead 90 meters from the plane wreckage. No one could understand what caused the crash. However, after the investigation, it turned out that the fuel tank cap had come loose, and the air currents hurled it into the windshield with such force that it shattered, and the piece hit Bales. He blacked out, leaving the plane without a pilot. You know, racing always involves risks, like countless other sports competitions. They make up one of the bloodiest pages of the Guinness Book of Records. By the way, I noticed that 2013 became one of the most tragic years in Guinness history. That year, the Bahamas hosted the 6th annual Vertical Blue event. This elite freediving competition takes place in Dean's Blue Hole, the 2nd deepest sinkhole in the world. Vertical Blue among divers is like Wimbledon in tennis, so only the best athletes make it to this competition. Among them, there was an American newcomer, Nicholas Mavoli. He participated in freediving competitions for the first time just a year earlier, yet immediately set a national record by diving 100 meters without any assistance. On November 17th, as part of Vertical Blue, he planned to set a new record, to reach a depth of 72 meters in one breath, without fins or extra oxygen. At noon, surrounded by other athletes, observers, and rescuers, Mavoli dived, quickly descending into the depths. On the surface, they were monitoring his descent with sonar, and nothing seemed to cause concern until Mevoli suddenly stopped at a depth of 68 meters. For a moment, it seemed like the diver had turned around, but the next second, he continued swimming deeper. Seeing this, several athletes on the surface flinched because diving to such a depth without fins was already quite a challenge. And if the diver had any doubts or problems, continuing the descent would be an extremely dangerous decision. However, after 3 minutes, 38 seconds, Mevoli shot back to the surface. The man immediately signaled OK with his fingers. According to the competition rules, though, for the record to be credited, he also had to say that he was OK. But that wasn't the case. A horrifying wheeze erupted from Mevoli's throat. His eyes rolled back, and he blacked out. Journalists captured the diver a moment before this, and these gruesome images went viral as it was Mevoli's last photo, right before his death. Rescuers tried to save the athlete for 90 minutes and even made 3 adrenaline shots. Unfortunately, he had catastrophic lung damage, and Nicholas Mevoli lost his life, becoming the first athlete to perish in international freediving competitions in the 21-year history of this sport. Another tragedy during a record attempt also happened on the water, yet this time it wasn't related to depth, but speed. In 1964, when a jet boat pilot, Lee Taylor, tried to set his first world water speed record, he noticed he was about to crash into the shore at a speed of 282 kilometers per hour and ejected from the boat. He was thrown across a flat rock for about 15 meters. During this accident, he suffered fractures of the skull, thigh, and ankle, and damage to his left eye. Taylor remained in a coma for 18 days and spent the next 6 months in hospitals. Do you think this deterred Lee from piloting jet boats? Not at all. On the contrary, 3 years later, he broke the world water speed record, reaching an average speed of 459 kilometers per hour. This record stood for 10 years until another athlete surpassed it. Then, Lee Taylor badly wanted to claim the title back. On November 13, 1980, the jet boat US Discovery II was launched into the water. At its helm, there was 46-year-old Lee. The weather was perfectly calm. The pilot completed all necessary checks and preparations and took off. Taylor's wife and daughter watched as his boat sped, creating a spray wall behind it, and then suddenly shattered into pieces. Spectators screamed in horror, whereas rescuers instantly dispatched a helicopter to the scene. Due to a gruesome twist of fate, just 2 days earlier, Taylor himself said at an interview that while he was fearless, an accident at such speed could only end tragically. Perhaps he had a premonition. The only thing found among the wreckage of the boat was Taylor's helmet. Only a week after the catastrophe, his body was discovered at the bottom of the lake. The pilot was still in his seat. The exact cause of the fatal crash was never determined, and Lee Taylor failed to reclaim his world title. If we return to the deadly 2013 in record-setting history, there's yet another story, this time related to speed on land. Here, most speed records were set on specifically designed and insanely expensive streamliner bikes. These motorcycles have a completely enclosed and rocket-like structure. Our next record breaker, William Bill Warner, couldn't really afford such beasts. So in 2010, he DIY'd his motorcycle's configuration. Bill converted the gasoline engine to run on methanol, allowing him to remove the giant cooling block from the transport and make it much lighter. Plus, Warner installed an aluminum frame, carbon fiber wheels, and a homemade aerodynamic fairing. Adding a turbocharger to the mix, the pilot increased the motorcycle's initial power by more than 7 times. In 2011, Warner set the world speed record on a regular motorcycle, reaching almost 502 kilometers per hour over a 2.4 kilometer stretch. But just 2 years later, Warner wanted to beat his own record. On the morning of July 14th, in front of Guinness Records observers and countless spectators, Bill Warner hit the track. When he reached almost 460 kilometers per hour, his motorcycle suddenly turned, and the next moment, it crashed into a concrete pillar. Warner was thrown from the motorcycle, and both of them got dragged tens of meters apart along the track. Although the man remained conscious after the accident, Eventually, his injuries proved fatal. Unfortunately, Warner is far from the only motorcyclist who gave his life trying to break a world record. On August 27, 2005, renowned Iranian daredevil Javad Paluzbanian told TV viewers that he was going to break the world record for jumping over buses on a motorcycle. Immediately after that, the man got on his bike and headed to the base of the ramp, where he was supposed to jump over 22 buses. Amidst the encouraging cries of the audience, the 44-year-old biker started accelerating, flew into the air at the end of the ramp, and crashed straight into the buses. The television broadcast was immediately cut off, and doctors rushed to Javad. It turned out that the man died on the spot, crashing into the 13th bus. However, the desire to set records isn't exclusive to men. Ukrainian-American mountaineer Anna Gutu and Gina Marie Ruzajidlo, an American athlete of Polish descent, competed for the third title of the first American to conquer all 8,000ers in the world in the fall of 2023. These are 14 peaks over 8,000 meters above sea level. And for both mountaineers, the last lowest one, Shishapangma in China, remained unconquered. Both athletes climbed the mountain simultaneously, each accompanied by experienced Sherpa guides. The only difference was that they chose slightly different routes. So, it was only a matter of time before one of them would achieve the coveted mountaineering title. However, around 11 a.m., when both groups were at an altitude of about 7,800 meters, a powerful avalanche hit the mountain. After that, communication with Gutu and her guide was lost. However, while rescuers were assessing how safe it was to organize searches, a second avalanche occurred at 1 p.m. Since then, there had been no news from either team. Anna Gutu's and her guide's bodies were found the next day, while the search for Gina Marie and her Sherpa guide Tenzin was still ongoing. Once upon a time, the man was a record holder, conquering all 14,000ers in 92 days. However, rescuers failed to find any trace of the mountaineers. Gina Marie and her guide were declared missing, and due to the dangerous conditions, the mountain was closed to rescuers for a long time. This story particularly struck me. What were the odds that two avalanches would hit the mountain simultaneously and at a spot where the potential record setters were, and neither of them would survive? However, I'd like to end this video with a slightly more optimistic story related to the desire to conquer the heights. In the early 60s, American Nicholas John Piatanita heard about the world record for the highest parachute jump. The guy decided he had to beat it. But we're not talking about that 4,000-meter flight we see on YouTube. We're talking about a jump from the Stratosphere. The record was set at an altitude of 25,457 meters. That's almost twice as high as any passenger plane flies, and far beyond the ozone layer that protects all life on Earth from solar radiation. And although Nicholas only started amateur skydiving in 1963, that didn't stop him. 2 years later, the man made his first attempt to break the world altitude record. For this, Nicholas needed a spacesuit and a specially equipped gondola with an oxygen supply just to survive at such a crazy altitude. This structure was lifted by a virtually ordinary hot air balloon while it was controlled from the ground. However, Nicholas's first attempt failed at an altitude of only 4,900 meters, where the terrible wind shredded the unprotected balloon. Then, only a year later, Piatanita went for it again. This time, he reached an unprecedented altitude of 37,600 meters. But when the man was preparing for the jump, it turned out that he couldn't detach from the oxygen line. Disappointed, Nicholas had to descend back with nothing. Just 3 months later, though, he dared to try for the third time. The gondola with the balloon began to rise, yet at an altitude of 17,375 meters, ground dispatchers heard a sudden hissing of air, and then Nicholas's voice over the radio. He said just one word: emergency. The gondola was immediately lowered. Still, it took 25 long minutes. When the medics finally reached Nicholas, it turned out that his spacesuit had depressurized, and the man was without oxygen for about 3 to 5 minutes. Because of this, his brain suffered irreversible damage, and Nicholas Piatanita passed away. Although he never set the parachute jumping record, his second attempt turned out to be the world record for the highest piloted balloon flight, which was only broken in 2012. Over the decades, over 60,000 various records have been registered in the Guinness Book. Among them, there are many deadly ones. However, you can find something absolutely safe for yourself. like making a mosaic from the largest number of pumpkins and zucchinis. More stories about records gone wrong are already available on the channel.